Suicide Squad. It's one of a number of violent films that have been given a PG-13 rating in the United States. In X-Men, we see bones break through bare skin. In Warcraft, we see a sword push through someone's chest. But that PG-13 rating means that there are no age restrictions on who can see them. Rad, help us understand this. Why are there no firm age restrictions on these violent movies?
Well, the whole idea behind a PG-13 movie is like it's there for a studio to push the limits with violence and stuff, but not to the point where they cross over into our territory. Because with our territory, that's when you have to start weeding out the audience. And for blockbuster movies, you need your teen audience to show up and not have to deal with bringing their parents along. So I think we have to remember that the PG-13 rating, it was invented in order to push the boundaries of violence in film. Like it came out in 1984, right after Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and a lot of parents reacted to young kids seeing a guy pushing his hand into another man's chest, pulling out his beating heart, and that was a PG movie. And Steven Spielberg took a lot of flack for that, so he called the MPAA and he said, "I think we need a rating in between PG and R because that's just too big a space." So that's always been an aspect of the PG-13 rating, where it's like, how far can we push it? I mean, go back and look at Batman Returns and see how messed up that movie is.
Okay, let's continue the pop culture parenting here because some people have pointed out that an Oscar-winning drama like Spotlight gets an R rating, mainly because of curse words and of course the subject matter. But Steven, that's not the movie that your kids are bugging you to see. I don't think that's like the cool movie in grade 5.
Actually, mine is.
Really?
I saw that. Love that movie. But I got a special case. I got a 10-year-old boy who's obsessed with what he can and can't see. What's PG-13? What's an R rating? And yeah, I mean, I think one thing we have to remember is that these are guidelines. Like, everyone's different. I mean, the guidelines to me seem totally absurd. Mm-hmm. Like, a couple of swear words can get you an R rating. I mean, that's why Spotlight has an R rating. There's no violence in it. There's just, journalists swearing, which, certainly my children have been exposed. Yeah, exactly.
And not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. I think it is more the subject matter too, though, right?
Yeah,
that's a big thing.
And then there's the case of sex, which is, is you can have a ton of violence, but even the slightest amount of sex gives you an R rating. And that, I mean, we're back to the old American Puritanism and love of violence, which seems to me deeply unhealthy and one of the worst cultural formats. But then, again, I think every parent, you just take these ratings for what they're worth rather than, as some kind of law.
You've said for you that it's the kind of violence that matters.
To me, it is. I mean, you remember the Star Wars movie, like The Force Awakens? Like, what I was shocked by in that movie was the blood on the stormtrooper's head. That seemed to me like it crossed a real line. Like when it's people shooting each other with lasers, or like the Warcraft people where it's like orcs and cartoonish, that's one thing. That's like Bugs Bunny, blowing up Elmer Fudd, right? Like it's not, that's a different kind of violence than like, say, Deadpool, where a carcass is thrown against a wall and splats and you can see everything fall down. I think we tend to think of violence as this unitary thing, but of course it's very different, and the presentation of it is very different. And so, again, I think to me it really is a case-by-case basis.
I'm going to add to that. Like, I mean, just in terms of an example of like the type of violence, like my son, he's 6 years old. I let him see Jurassic Park. This guy loves dinosaurs. He's not scared of any of that stuff. He's also a big Marvel fan. And then he wanted to see Captain America Civil War. But there's a scene in that movie where an assassin, a friendly assassin, suffocates a woman with his bare hand. Yeah. And that was where I was like, okay, that's the kind of violence where I'm going to cross the line, and you're not ready for that yet.
It's odd, though. It's very hard to define, even to yourself, what that line is. Mm-hmm. But it really is clear to me. Like, seeing that blood smear on the, I was like, that's wrong. That shouldn't be in this movie.
Rich, I want to get your thoughts in a second, but first, Rad, how does the Canadian system compare? Because we've been talking about the American ratings.
It's very similar, especially within the last 10 years. There was an update that made it so that we have just as many ratings as the U.S. The Canadian system, it actually works province by province, so I can only really speak to Ontario.
Okay.
But basically in Ontario, we have, instead of R, we have 18A, which serves the same function as the R rating, where a parent has to take you if you're under 18. Instead of the Americans have NC-17, which means you're not allowed to take a child at all, and that's our R rating. And then instead of PG-13, we have 14A. Then we go back to the basics, PG and G. But again, the system has the same problems as the American system, because in the end, it's people who are deciding these ratings, and it's whatever mindset they bring to the table and what their their tolerance of violence and sexuality is in terms of how the rating.
And I think that's the point, right? Because I think that's the thing that concerns me is that you sort of feel like other people are determining for you, and I don't know if they have the same values as me. So, for instance, we were talking about this beforehand. Often the rating system around sex is meant to not show gay sex. So gay sex gets a higher rating than straight sexuality, right?
Because
And so,
in the MPAA, I mean, they're representing Middle America, and we're talking about people who are more afraid of gay marriage than guns.
Right.
So you know, like,
and I think that there are, for me, there are also there are some websites you can go to that talk about films for parents. So you can look ahead of time and know what's going to be in the film. And I would find that much more useful because, there have been times when I've been watching a film with my kid and something will be like really homophobic or really sexist or something, so then we have to, we'll stop and we'll discuss it. But it kind of comes out of the blue, and often it might be just, like an offensive joke where I don't think that he shouldn't hear it, but I want to be able to talk about that with him and have that opportunity. And I think that what happens is there's this really ham-fisted kind of one-size-fits-all approach, as opposed to kind of empowering parents to say, okay, well, this is the kind of sex or the kind of violence or the kind of language, so I can make a judgment about whether my kid is ready for that or not ready for it, or
But the system, we talk about it as a guideline, which is exactly what it should be.
Yeah.
But when you get to, so in the U.S., when you get the NC-17 rating, or here in Canada, when you get the R rating, that's where it becomes really restrictive.
Yeah.
Because then a parent can't make the decision. They're just not allowed to take their children. And I'll give you a recent example. There's a movie called Blue is the Warmest Color, a lovely coming-of-age story about
Did that get an NC-17 rating?
It got an NC-17 in the U.S. It got an R in Canada, so we're in
Ridiculous.
Ontario, so we're just as bad in that sense, right? And I remember when it got the NC-17 rating in the U.S. This is a movie that a teen girl who's maybe like discovering her sexuality, it could really have a profound effect on her. So she wouldn't have been allowed to go, but the movie theater playing it said, well, no, we're not going to honor that rating.
Right.
And New York Times film critic A.O. Scott's like, I'm taking my teenage daughter to see that movie.
So, Rad, I'll start with you. What kind of changes would you like to see to the film rating system?
You know what? I would do away with the NC-17R stuff, because that is taking the decision away from the parents. I think we need to empower parents more to be able to guide their children. But in terms of the structure, it is not a structural thing. It is just a cultural, a mindset. I think maybe in terms of the people who are deciding the ratings, maybe you need a more representative panel, and maybe just talk about, what are the positive aspects and in terms of the leniency towards violence, because they're very lenient when it comes to violence. I don't know of a movie getting an NC-17 rating on violence alone. They just need to have a better discussion. But
Stephen, what do you think?
Well, I just think it's as we said, it's really cultural, and we're in the middle of, first of all, a really cultural misunderstanding around sex and violence that are taught, but also this really crude. It's based on this really crude understanding of what films do to people. It came out of, as you said, 1984, where it's all of these representations lead to the thing that they're representing, which is totally not true, and is just a big misunderstanding of the way that culture works. But as I said, I don't think there is a solution here except to be sensible and use common sense and use your own judgment about your own particular children and the particular films that you're seeing. I really like it when they describe what's exactly in it in the rating, because that's what actually makes the difference.
That's what, as Rachel was saying.
Yeah, cartoonish violence is very different to me than somebody having their stomach cut open with a knife, right? Or a Tarantino movie, right? Where it's this is comic violence, which is really, to me, only for adults or only for sort of more mature children.
I like this pop culture parenting. This is interesting for me. Maybe for the next phase of my life.